We acknowledge and esteem your faith in every footstep. Please know that it is worth it, then, now, and forever.
Women of faith are found in every time period. Their good works and perseverance are an inspiration to all of us. Historians Richard Turley and Brittany Chapman are co-authoring a series of books that highlight some of these women. They join me today to share some of these historic stories. Glad that you're here. And the first one is pretty amazing. A heroic mother named Anna Widtsoe. Tell us about her, Brittany. What makes her story so great?
Anna Widtsoe was a widowed mother when she converted to the church in Norway. And in the 1880s, she brought her young sons to Utah and was determined that they would have a good education. And so she worked menial labor to try and finance their education. And she did that kind of at the discouragement of her neighbors and even some of her church leaders. But
they thought that the kids should be doing manual labor,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. And but eventually her efforts paid off and her children were successful. One even became an apostle, John A. Widtsoe. And and she kind of represents one of the many unsung stories of mothers and of women who quietly contribute to history. And history is often focused on men, but
there's a lot of great women in there. And she was very strong and wise. Yeah. The other one is Mary Goebel Payne. She's an ancestor of President Gordon B. Hinckley, right? We've heard a lot about her in pioneer days.
Ancestor, actually, of President Hinckley's wife.
Her wife.
And we often hear about her story coming across the plains. She was part of the 1856 ill-fated companies that were caught in snow. Hundreds died, others were injured. She herself had her toes taken off with a saw and a butcher knife. She endured all of that, got married and had 13 children, and then the last straw dropped. Her husband died. And when that happened, she became, for a time, bitter and angry. She wrote in her account of this, she said, "It just didn't seem right. I became almost bitter. The bishop and his counselors came to see me and said it was the Lord's will." Ooh. And that she felt was an insensitive comment. Huh? So she said, "I was so angry I grabbed the broom and chased them from my yard. I was bitter toward the church, my neighbors, the Lord, even to staying away from church." So she had that period where she felt this bitterness, and then she regrouped. She thought about it. She had a spiritual experience. She returned to church activity, and she began serving others and lost herself in that service. And I think she's an example of how, though we often honor pioneers and think that they were perfect, they had challenges just as all of us do. And she was able to get past that and move on.
That is a great story. Many of these, too, about women who, despite all odds, thought that things would be okay. And I guess Abigail Smith Abbott is one of those women. Brittany, tell us about her.
Abigail Smith Abbott was struggling to keep her family alive during the Nauvoo period in the wake of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith. And there came a point where she had no more food to feed her family. And her daughter recorded an experience about how she confidently told her children that the Lord has provided in the past and he will provide again. And shortly thereafter, a neighbor knocked on the door and asked how much food they had. She said nothing, and he gave her 100 pounds of flour, cheese, meat, and her daughter recorded that that rarely after that did they go without food.
Incredible faith again. Yeah. And then the other one is an amazing story too about a shipwreck that left an LDS mom scrambling to stay alive. What's her story?
Rosa Logie got married in Australia, and then she and her husband did what pioneers were encouraged to do in those days, and that was they migrated to the United States. On their way to the United States from Australia, they hit a coral reef at night, and the ship went down. They scrambled to the coral reef, and if you can imagine being a young mother with a one-year-old daughter, and you're standing waist to chest deep on a coral reef in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with nothing else around except the bell, which is sticking up out of the ship and tolling as the waves go by. I'm sure she felt utter hopelessness at that moment. But the next day, she and the other passengers were able to see a small island in the distance. They made their way to the island. They spent 2 months shipwrecked on the island. They eventually were rescued, made it to Tahiti, but it took a total of 8 months for her to get to the destination.
Wow, that is incredible. Well, wonderful stories, all in your new book. Thanks so much for being here. And these are only a few of the many stories found in their books, Women of Faith in the Latter Days. We have 4 copies of these books to give away on our Facebook page at Mormon Times TV. You can go there to get the details. Thanks so much for joining